I am here with, arguably, I think one of the greatest guys in the universe, old, old dear friend, amazing colleague, and even if you weren't, my best buddy in the world, you would still be to me like one of the greatest doctors and thought leaders out there. Mark Hyman, welcome, Mark.
Thank you. Thank you, Mark.
Yeah, hey, let me just brag about you just a little bit more and then we can dive in. So, Mark Hyman, MD, believes that we all deserve a life of vitality, and he's dedicated to tackling the root causes of chronic disease by harnessing the power of functional medicine to transform healthcare. So, Dr. Hyman works with his teams every day to empower people, organizations, and communities to heal body and mind and improve our social and economic resilience. He's a practicing physician, 8-time best-selling author.
Nine now. Nine
Nine
last
times,
week.
yes, congratulations. Speaker, educator, advocate, recently now the director of the Cleveland Clinic Center for Functional Medicine and founder and director of the UltraWellness Center, chairman of the board of the Institute for Functional Medicine, medical editor at Huffington Post, and
Tired just listening to all that.
I know, man, you've been very prolific in your career. Honestly, that's one thing I love about you is you can place yourself in a lot of different realms when it comes to healing, not only at the clinical end of things, at the teaching end of things, and even dive into the research end of things. What's got you excited these days?
Well, what's really sort of remarkable and something I actually never thought would happen is that I found myself at the center of one of the leading medical institutions in the world, the Cleveland Clinic. And I love being on the outside because it allowed me to take pot shots and, and call things as they were. And I figured, inside an institution would be very difficult to create change, to get any excitement about what we're doing. And what's really remarkable to me is at Cleveland Clinic, Toby Cosgrove, as the CEO, is really one of the leading thinkers in healthcare today. He's completely disruptive, completely innovative. He called for us to come there. I didn't want to go there, and it wasn't something on my bucket list at all. And he convinced me that they could really help us transform healthcare through functional medicine, and that they're funding this to a very big degree through funding research, developing a clinical center of excellence, developing medical school curriculum and postgraduate curriculum for functional medicine, as well as policy work, community work. I was just in Washington, a couple of weeks ago working on all sorts of policy initiatives. So there's a tremendous organization that's behind this transformation. And I never thought that we'd actually get this amount of support and money and interest. And it's happening. Like, this is happening now. It's not like on the outside anymore. And I'm sort of thrilled to be sitting there when the directors of all the other institutes are coming to me to say, how do we bring in functional medicine into this? How do we get functional medicine into the program? So I'm super excited about this initiative because we're going to prove through some very specific kinds of research that functional medicine works better and costs less, that it's a new paradigm for chronic disease. And we're going to build a platform for educating and training more doctors. When we're actually building a clinical program, a fellowship and mentorship apprenticeship program for functional medicine at Cleveland Clinic, where we're going to actually start to really change medicine from the inside. And the directors of the institutes are coming to me saying, for urology, how do we create prostate health? We know so much prostate cancer is related to diet. We know that heart disease is related to that. We know that the cancer, like, we want to bring this into what we're doing and use food as medicine. And we don't know how. Please help us. And I'm sort of staggered by the open-mindedness and by the interest and by the enthusiasm in Cleveland Clinic and how it's an accelerator for everything that we want to do.
Well, that's just beautiful. I mean, it gives me personally so much hope. And to your point, it's way easier for us to transform ourselves as individuals or transform our own practice, our own life, coming into a company, a corporation, a clinic, a hospital. Institutions move a little slow because they tend to be big and lumbering. And here you are, basically reporting, wow, this is catching fire because
Yeah.
an institution is just a bunch of people, really.
Yeah.
And
And everybody's ready for this. Like,
yeah.
the message is found a ready audience. I'm just like sort of shocked, honestly. I thought there'd be so much sort of doubt and sort of criticism and derision, but it's been like open arms everywhere. Come, please help us. We want more. How do we do this? How do we transform the food system at the hospital? How do we transform, policies? How do we do community work? It's almost overwhelming, the opportunity. It's almost, I go there and it's like drinking from a fire hose of opportunity
Yeah.
for transformation in
Yeah.
healthcare and the future. Because they know, I think, they know that our current system isn't working, that it's limited in its capacity to deal with chronic disease, which affects about 1 in 2 Americans. Chronic lifestyle preventable disease globally will cost $47 trillion over the next 20 years. And it's all stuff we know how to deal with if we have the right strategy. And I think using the same approach of drugs and surgery, while it's awesome for acute illness, doesn't work for most of the chronic problems that we see. So whether it's autoimmune disease, whether it's digestive disorders, whether it's neurodevelopmental disorders or degenerative disorders, whether it's cardiometabolic diseases, whether it's allergic inflammatory diseases, these are all things which through functional medicine we have tremendous success with and have a new roadmap. So it's pretty shocking, but it's actually happening. We're talking about developing a fecal transplant research center there and looking at the microbiome and doing microbiome analysis. And it's like, I'm just kind of blown away that there's this interest and openness, and there's donors coming and giving money. We've raised over $3 million already for what we're doing.
So when you look into your crystal ball, what do you think is possible? And more to the point, if you could sort of steer it in the direction that you'd want to see it go, and we were in this conversation 20 years from now, well, what would have happened? How would things have changed?
I think what would happen is that we would have completely reinvented healthcare to be a decentralized, self-empowered system that allows people, consumers, patients to learn methods of self-health and self-care using the principles of functional medicine, and that we'd have still some tertiary care centers for acute illness and for tertiary care functional medicine problems, but most things would be solved outside the healthcare system in the community, like we did with the church. We use the functional medicine principles and we distribute them through a church, for example. Or I'm working with Zumba, where they have 200,000 Zumba instructors, and they want to create the church of fitness, essentially empowering community health workers to work with their communities to start to transform the way people live and eat and play. And these are really radical ideas that I think are going to sort of transplant how we're currently doing healthcare, and that it will be paid for. It will be paid for at first by corporations. It will be paid for by insurance companies because they realize that's where they're going to get the most return on their investment, and ultimately be paid for by Medicare and Medicaid, who really will recognize that we have to change our reimbursement, and that reimbursement drives care, not science, and that if we don't change reimbursement, we won't change practice, and that's what we need to shift to.
So help the skeptic in me for a moment, because it feels like the drug companies and sort of the lumbering hospital system and how those organizations make money. It almost feels like that's the impediment, because we've been a disease-driven model, and there's so many companies that profit if I'm sick, as opposed to being well.
100%. Right. So what's going to happen is that we're, and this is very optimistic, but I think we're going to do research that's going to look at cost of care and really look at the total impact of what we're doing. And if we can document the economic impact and benefits of what we're doing, if we can show we can get people off insulin and reverse chronic diseases and make a dent, then payment will start to shift. And when payment shifts, everything shifts, right? Because if that is what's driving care, if your drugs and surgery are paid for, then that's what will be done. If shopping classes and cooking classes and support groups are paid for, and the community health workers are paid for, that's what will get done. So it really depends on what we pay for. And I think so I'm optimistic that through our partnership with Cleveland Clinic, which is one of the most highly respected healthcare institutions in the world. President Obama asked Toby Cosgrove, the CEO of Cleveland Clinic, to come run the VA, which is the largest healthcare institution in the world, because he believes that he has the secret sauce. So I think he does too. And I think some of the innovations there are tremendous. And there's going to be very disruptive things happening in healthcare. We're going to be doing things in a completely different way. We're going to break down the walls of the hospitals and the clinics. We're not going to be doing things at all in the same way. I think the DNA of functional medicine, or the sort of intel inside that drives biology change, we know how to do that. And I think the question of behavior change, that's going to come through these decentralized community-based models of healthcare.
Well, it's so exciting.
In fact, this is really what's exciting to me. This is a book that is called Turning the World Upside Down. I just happen to have it on my desk. I wasn't planning to talk about it, but it's a book by the head of the National Health Service in England. He was the former head of that, and he says, we need to put people and communities at the center of healthcare, not doctors and hospitals. And so that's what I'm calling for, and I think everybody's super excited about it.
So you've already mentioned that sort of one of the great surprises for you has been to see that, a place like the Cleveland Clinic, there's such this amazing openness and hunger for change and transformation. Any other, for you, happy, good, positive surprises that you've noticed recently or over the years that really kind of caught your attention in your journey as, a doctor, a health advocate, a teacher in this realm?
Yeah, I mean, I think what's interesting now is that, I think I'm very cynical about government and policy and, trying to get things done in Washington. But I see there's a few people in there who are really trying to shift change. People like Tim Ryan, who wrote a book called The Real Food Revolution and a Mindful Nation about mindfulness and food. Right up your alley there, Mark. You love this guy. He's the meditating, healthy eating.
I've met him. Yeah. He's such a sweet guy. Yeah.
It's like my best buddy now. And then Cory Booker has just entered the Senate, but he's really looking at food and food policy. And so I think if we can sort of look at the dragon and see where the missing scale is on the food industry, we can go after key targets. And I think there are policymakers who are really focused on that, whether it's ending antibiotics in food, which will transform how we do animal husbandry, or whether it's GMO labeling, which will actually change the way we think about food. It will have indirect effects by transforming the way we look at things and when we do things. And they seem like little policy changes, but they actually have broad impact, and they're being fought, but they're potentially going to come to fruition. And I think those will start to shift the culture of food. So I'm super excited about those changes that I see. I think I'm on the board of the Environmental Working Group, and they are also focused on this food fight. Really creating transparency in food, creating a clarity around how we deal with these issues of our food system, of our agriculture system. I'm going to a global food summit where I'm speaking in front of some of the top food companies in the world, talking about the challenges of health, talking about the ways in which our food is causing a problem, and we're having these conversations at the highest level to shift the thinking. I mean, I had dinner with the vice chairman of Pepsi the other night, and we had a fascinating conversation about food and the science behind calories and sugar, and there's cracks in the system. They're happening, and they're sort of, the light is getting in, and I think the light will get in. I think the light will prevail.
So did he like drink Coke or Pepsi or neither?
No, but he's a doctor, an endocrinologist, and a type 2 diabetic, and he was eating tons of bread and sugar and dessert.
Wow.
And I said, do you want me to help you cure your diabetes? He's like, no, it's fine. As long as I run every day, it's under control. I'm like, massive denial.
Yeah.
So.
But that reminds me how much one can create a whole philosophy. One could run the Pepsi Cola company and not think twice about it if one is disconnected from one's own body and doesn't see, how I'm treating this, how I'm managing it, how I'm exercising it, how I'm feeding it has an impact on my health. It kind of starts.
They have stories. I mean, they live in their own storied world like we all do, and so they believe their stories. I don't think he's a bad person. I don't think he's evil. I think he's just has a certain perspective that's biased and believes that by taking 400,000 tons of sugar out of the food supply, it's a good thing, and by actually reformulating products to have less calories is a good thing. Taking 6 trillion calories out of the food system, but I think if you have a Pepsi that's 20 less calories, it's still a Pepsi. Or if you have, Lay's potato chips that are 20 less calories, they're still Lay's potato chips. It's still junk, right? So I think the whole idea of food as information is not an idea that they actually have embraced.
Mm-hmm. Why don't we pitch our tent there for a moment? Food is information. I mean, what a beautiful, powerful, game-changing concept. Because normally, previously, we've been thinking of food as just a package of finite nutrients, and the value of the food is just given in what it contains and how much.
Yeah.
And that's great, and it's useful and it's helpful. But food is information.
Yeah.
Why do we need to know about that?
Crazy idea.
Right?
This is actually one of the fundamental ideas of functional medicine is that we can modify our gene expression through environmental inputs, and the biggest input is food. So the thing that drives the most change every day in our biology is what we eat. It alters genes that are expressed. It changes proteins that get produced from our DNA. It alters our microbiome with every single bite. It resets or regulates hormones. It affects our immune system and cytokines that are produced. And it works immediately. It's not something that takes decades or even days to work. It literally works with every single bite. And I don't think people understand the impact of that and how that affects the way they feel, their brain function, their mood, their energy, their digestion, their metabolism. And so what we use in functional medicine, our primary agent, our primary drug is food. And the science behind this is just tremendous in terms of how it modifies your system. I was having dinner with my friend David Ludwig, who's a professor at Harvard, and we were talking about fat and sugar and carbs, and we were sitting with a vegan who was a friend who's a vegan, was like 300 pounds overweight. And I said, because he's eating a lot of artificial sweeteners and he's having a lot of starch, and we were talking about type 1 diabetics. It was fascinating. We were talking about the role of insulin. And so if you take a type 1 diabetic and you feed them 10,000 calories a day, they won't gain weight if they don't take insulin. Right, they actually lose weight. The first symptom of type 1 diabetes is weight loss and hyperphagia, which means you're starving all the time because the sugar is not getting in your cells. So you're eating like 10, 15,000 calories a day and you're losing weight. So how does that happen if it's all about calories in, calories out? It's not. It's about what hormones and molecules get produced when you eat. So he said, for example, if you drank a liter or 2 liters of olive oil a day for a week, you wouldn't gain any weight because you wouldn't produce insulin. But if you have carbs or even some protein that's excess of what you need, you'll produce insulin, and that will cause weight gain. So it's so fascinating when you kind of start to think about these extreme situations and what they imply about the role of food and calories and weight and metabolism. So I think the quality of the information is fascinating, and I'm really interested in creating optimum performance. How do we sort of optimize people's functioning through food? And I've been experimenting with myself, and I'm 55 now, and I actually am leaner and fitter than I was with far less exercise by changing my diet to be very, very low sugar and glycemic diet. So, and eating more fat. And I'm like, because I eat, when we met 20 years ago, I think, I was very focused on more whole grains and more beans.
Yeah.
And, not a lot of pasta and sugar, but, healthier starches and also, very low fat.
Yeah.
And I remember, I even went back and looked at my Ultra Metabolism book. I wasn't that much against fat, but I also sort of was restricting some fats. And it was just fascinating to see the change. And now I've shifted my diet. So in the morning, I have only fat for breakfast. And I have greens and I have fat with avocados. And, I have coconut butter and coconut oil. And I just feel like a rock star in the morning. And my brain's clear. I have tons of energy. Where I used to kind of feel a little sluggish, even with, healthier grain breakfast. So I think, I think we're shifting our thinking about all the role of food in our health. And that's what's so exciting to me, because we're going to be at Cleveland Clinic doing randomized controlled trials with rigorous design at one of the major medical institutions in the world, and proving that, yes, we can get people off insulin. I mean, I had a woman who did my 10-day detox diet the other day. She posted on the website, she said, in 3 days, I was off my insulin. In 10 days, I lost 18 pounds. I talked to my dad because I just came out with my 10-day detox diet cookbook. And he said, I did it. He never listens to me. He said, I've been doing it, and the recipe's amazing, and it's delicious. And I lost 14 pounds in 8 days.
Get out of here. That's
I'm like,
amazing.
really, Dad? That's pretty amazing. He's 87, so it's never too late.
Wow. Wow. I want to highlight something that you said, and it's so obvious, but I think it's so important, in that we're living in a time when our thinking is so dramatically changing. You mentioned almost casually, like, oh, food impacts our gene expression. Like, that's an explosive concept, because normally the average person, I was taught, I still remember from junior high school biology, that genetics determines everything. And it doesn't matter, nothing else matters, is your DNA is going to make sure that it does whatever it wants you to do. And it turns out that genes are being turned on and off sometimes within seconds in terms of responding to our environment. That's just a mind-boggling concept.
It is mind-boggling. What's even more mind-boggling is, like, talking about genes, you've got, 20,000 genes, which is about as much as an earthworm, right?
Mm-hmm.
But you actually have 10 times as many bacterial cells in you or on you as your own cells, and you have 100 times as much bacterial DNA in you, in your gut mostly. So that's very fascinating. And we're learning actually that the quality and the type of bacteria that you have in your gut controls everything, because those genes are making proteins and immune markers and hormone regulators and things that alter your brain chemistry and that affect everything in your system. And it's basically your gut flora. And what determines your gut flora? What you eat.
Mm-hmm.
You literally, with every bite, change which bugs you're fertilizing or which ones you're killing, right? If you eat tons of sugar and starch, you're going to fertilize one group. If you eat more fat and protein, you'll fertilize another group. If you eat processed food, you'll fertilize another group. So it's fascinating. And we actually see this, changing people's metabolism and changing people's biochemistry and their brain function. And I think that's fascinating research. We're just sort of uncovering that.
Yeah. We're true symbiotic organisms. And, on one level, it's so unsexy to think that I am so interdependent on these billions of little tiny organisms that they're a little squiggly and they're weird and they're strange. And I can't even see them, for goodness sake, yet my life kind of depends on them.
Totally.
Totally. It's what a shift in consciousness. Now, you also mentioned caloric theory, which in a lot of ways feels like yet another sort of final frontier of nutritional medicine, where we really have to take a look and say, okay, what is it? What's really going on? So you brought up the example of a type 1 diabetic. How should we be thinking about calories these days in a way that is, useful for us as nutritionally experimenting human beings?
Well, I'm embarrassed to say I'm working on my 12th book right now,
Yeah.
and it's on fat.
Hmm.
And it's on the role of fat in health and disease. And what's fascinating is I sort of uncovering the research on this and looking at how it actually, these theories have come up, which is what we call the energy balance theory, which is calories in, calories out. You eat more, you gain weight. You exercise less, you gain weight. So the solution is eat less, exercise more. We've all been told that, and it doesn't really work.
Mm-hmm.
And then the other theory is the hormone theory of metabolism, which is where the food that you eat creates information that changes the hormones and brain chemistry and everything else, and your metabolism, regardless of what you eat. I mean, regardless of the calories, right? So here's an example. Like David Ludwig was telling me about the study he did with rats, and it's for mice. And he's not a super sort of pro animal research guy, but years ago he did the study that he told me about, where he took these rats, and one group had a diet that was a high glycemic diet, and then there was a high fat diet. So one was high sugar, one high fat. The high sugar diet, they actually kept the calories the same, so they were exactly the same calories, and watch what happened. Now, when they fed them a high fat diet, the weight started to drop on these animals. So even though they were eating the same calories, the weight started going down. And then they had to actually reduce the calories to prevent the animals from being different weights, because they wanted them to be the same weight at the end of the study. So they actually had to reduce the calories, and they were still, losing weight compared to the high sugar. And they were eating exactly the same or less calories, and they were losing weight. I mean, they were eating, the high fat group was actually eating, more calories. They had to increase the calories to kind of prevent them from losing weight. So they actually were eating more calories. I said it wrong. So they're eating more calories, right? And then at the end of the study, they cut them open. And what was fascinating was that even though the rats eating the high fat diet had more food and more calories and was more fat, they had much less body fat. It's 70% less belly fat and body fat and everything else. And all the metabolic markers were different. So the fat in the diet actually plays a fascinating role, because we've been all afraid of fat for so long. But we now know that actually fat doesn't sort of jack up insulin, and it will increase your hunger. I mean, it'll increase your fat burning, it'll increase your metabolism, and it'll reduce your hunger.
Mm-hmm.
So when that happens, you lose weight. Whereas when you eat sugar, even if you restrict calories, you're doing all the opposite things. You're slowing your metabolism, you're slowing fat burning, and you're increasing your hunger. So it's a triple whammy against weight loss. So that's what's fascinating.
And yet, to the linguistic brain, fat in food sounds like fat on my body. It's
That's
a
right.
hard one to dissociate from.
Totally. I mean, I was talking to this friend of mine who's Tibetan. I said, so what's the word for the fat in the food you eat and the fat on your body? Is it the same word? And he's like, no, it's a totally different word.
Mm-hmm.
Like in America, in English, it's the same word. Fat on your body, fat you eat. It's like you eat fat, you get fat. It's like, makes sense, right? And that's what the nutritionists in Europe, you were training this as I was. Fat has 9 calories per gram and carbs have 4. And so if you eat less fat, you're going to cut out more calories, you're going to lose weight. Seems like total common sense, except it's not, right? The earth looks flat. Anybody could see it's flat. It's obviously flat. If you stand on top of a mountain, it looks flat. Unless you're in a spaceship, then it doesn't, right? But we all know it's actually not flat. But we kind of have to kind of go against our perception of what seems more common sense. In the same way with food, like it's just the things that seem self-evident aren't.
This piece about sugar, we're talking about its impact on the human body, its impact on metabolism. Here we are. It seems like we're now living in a time when there's so much information coming out. The books that you're writing, the information you put out, there's a wave of knowledge about sugar. And yet at the same time, wow, is it a ubiquitous substance? You could blindfold me and I can just walk outside and find it probably somewhere. Is it possible to recreate our diet system, our food supply chain? Where does it start?
We have to. I mean, there's just no choice. We have to do it. And I think it starts with people getting pissed off, making different choices, and basically rising up to do something different, to talk about it, to do the things that everybody's doing. And it's having an impact. I was in the movie Fed Up that came out. It has an impact. People change. And so it's slow, but I think what will happen is we'll change agricultural policies, we'll change the way we sort of grow food, the way we distribute food. And I think there'll be sort of parallel industries that are rising up to actually combat this. And I think it's actually happening. Mm-hmm. It's slower than we would like, but I think it's going to hit a critical mass because this is unsustainable what we're doing. Mm-hmm. Even the head of Pepsi said, the government is actually subsidizing us by supporting the production of low-cost, high-fructose corn syrup through their agricultural subsidies. Listen, we're just doing business. Like if it's so cheap, we can't not buy it, right? It's just bad business not to buy it. And they're making it cheap because they're subsidizing it.
Right, but which really means you and I are subsidizing it. It's our tax dollars.
100%. So like you look at places like Mexico, where they're actually bringing Bloomberg in because they want to really change their obesity epidemic. Now they have 1 in 10 kids who have type 2 diabetes. Here it's 1 in 10 adults. There it's 1 in 10 kids have adult onset diabetes. And they're taxing sugar and junk food. They're eliminating all processed and junk food from schools. They're having clear food labeling so that you know what you're eating is good, bad, or not. So you say red is bad, going to kill you. Yellow is, caution, and green is okay to eat. Like, wouldn't that be great to have food labels like that in America so you actually picked it up and you knew what it was? Yeah. Right? Instead of Cool Whip saying 0 trans fat and you think it's health food and small hydrogenated fats and high fructose corn syrup. And then they're also ending food marketing to kids. So no more junk food or any food marketing to kids that's not healthy food. Those are policies that have been implemented around the world in various places that are now being sort of looked at as a collective series of policies in Mexico to change this epidemic, which is destroying the country. I was talking to the Queen of Jordan's team in Jordan. They have 1 in 4 people with type 2 diabetes in the Middle East. It's all over. China's number 1 and India's number 2 in the world now in type 2 diabetes.
It seems like these epidemics have to grab our attention. We have to look and we have to listen to them. There's another sort of epidemic that I'm thinking of right now, which seems to be autism. it seems like autism spectrum disorder has been on the increase. And,
Hmm.
there's no official word as to, okay, here's what we think. What do you think is happening with this?
No, they've gone from like 1 in 2,500 kids to 1 in 50 boys or more. Um, and you can say it's a reporting error, or it's better diagnostics, it's better services. Maybe some of it is, maybe half of it is. But what about the other half? I mean, we're all the 30-year-old autistic people running around
Hmm.
now, right? I mean, something happened, right? So I think it's a combination of things. The yellow canaries in the coal mine used to be these birds they would put in the coal miners' neighborhoods when they were in the coal mining, because if they dropped dead, they knew it was time to get out. The air was bad, right? So the yellow canaries in our society are the autistic kids,
Hmm.
and they have genetics that make them susceptible to injury from environmental toxins, from poor food, from stresses. So when you look at the combination of the change in our food supply, the increased number of immunizations, the mercury in the immunizations, the aluminum, and the amount of antibiotics used, and the amount of things that are in our environment, environmental toxins, these kids are uniquely susceptible. They have genes that make them susceptible, and they can't unburden themselves. And I've treated many of these patients, and I see they all have the same pattern. Like they have, everyone's a little different, but they have these same patterns of genetic predispositions to being unable to detoxify, and they have terrible gut problems. I've seen fecal transplants actually transform kids. When you have C-section rates, now it's 1 in 3, you have lack of breastfeeding, you have early use of antibiotics. All these things affect these kids.
Hmm.
And this has been an epidemic of this collection of factors, from genes to breastfeeding and lack of breastfeeding, C-sections, antibiotic use, the change in our food supply, to increasing environmental toxins. And this has collectively just burdened these kids to such a point where they can't actually run their normal metabolism.
Hmm.
And their brains are affected by these changes in their body. And then they can be improved. They can be dramatically improved.
It's all the factors that you just mentioned, talking about food, talking about how we do childbirth, talking about environment. It seems like we're going sort of back to the future, meaning, back to what my grandparents did. They were eating real food from real fruits and vegetables, real animals, running around a real farm. It was a different time. All my grandparents lived into their late 80s, 90s. One of my grandparents almost made it to 100. My parents died, before they hit 60. And it just feels like our world has become more challenging. Our food supply has become more toxic to the human body. And it seems like we're living in a time when we're looking in the mirror and going, okay, time to turn it around.
Absolutely. It's funny. I was just downstairs going through some of my books on my shelf, and I pulled out a book that I had from 1979 that I read, and I was going through my notes in it and the underlined things I'd underlined, called The Soil and Health, by Sir Albert Howard, who's the father of organic agriculture. And he wrote it in the 30s, and how we're depleting our soils, we're really eroding our health through the erosion of our agricultural system. And I think those are two connected things. So I'm excited about these conversations that are happening. I think there's a rethinking. I'm going this next week to this global food summit, where we're talking about the nexus between hunger and obesity and agriculture, and how we grow our food, and all these things are connected to the environment. So it's a conversation that's starting to happen. And I think I think I heard Bill Clinton talk about it. He says, when you talk to any of these leaders of companies, it's like, you don't really want to make kids sick, do you? Like, you don't. It's not what you're like. You don't wake up in the morning and go, how am I going to do this? But you want to do the right thing. So you're stuck in the situation you're in. So how can you make changes that actually start to move that along?
Mm-hmm.
And I think that some things will be hard. I mean, listen, you got a company like Pepsi. It's $100 billion company. And, I think every day, 3 billion people in the world have a Pepsi product. It's just a crazy thing, and it's a monster.
Yeah.
And they're trying to think about shifting, and I'm optimistic. I think there's still a long way to go, and there's still a lot of nonsense that's happening. But we might have to wait. I don't know, until we start to get money out of politics. Maybe we'll overturn Citizens United, and after the next president, and we get a new Supreme Court, or maybe we can end the money in politics, because it'll show up so dirty one day
Hmm.
with the super PACs that are polluting our political environment. And somebody will get caught with their pants down, and the shit will hit the fan, and we'll have to have some massive change in our restructuring and funding of politics. Wouldn't it be great to just have a publicly funded political campaigns where people just you know you pay $1 for every person in the country for their tax, and that's what or $2 or $10 out of your taxes every year, and that's what funds the political campaigns. We can't continue to do it the way we do it.
Clearly. So we've talked about food, we've talked about environment a little bit, and for you, and maybe this is a more personal question, what heals? Like, what else heals? Normally we think of, food and vitamins in my surgery, maybe that's going to heal me.
For me,
Yes.
it's just nature, just
Hmm.
mountains, nature. I just got back from being up in Montana and in the wilderness, and it's like I just feel completely restored when I go there. So mountains and wilderness and wild is my medicine.
Yay. Anything else? What else heals for you?
Love.
Hmm.
Love is love is the best medicine.
Right? I,
Yeah.
I sometimes think that if all the food companies and all the hospitals were running on a little more love, the actual strategies that we do and the foods we produce would be very different. You know,
Absolutely.
if
Totally.
if the heart was guiding us as much as the head was guiding us, there's a whole different intelligence I think that lives here and that lives here.
Hmm. Yeah, I think that's I would say the future of health is love plus food
Hmm.
equals health.
I love it. Good for you. Good for us, Mark. I'm thrilled to have this conversation with you. Thrilled to spend time
Thanks,
together with
Andy.
you. How can people stay in touch with you and your world? Learn more about what you're up to. What should we know?
So absolutely. So they can go to drhyman.com. It's a great sort of source for all sorts of programs we're doing, detox challenges, all sorts of community support, and programs that help people learn about self-health and empowering themselves with the tools they need to actually transform their lives. And there's no lack of resources on there.
That's very true. No,
They can get me on Facebook and Twitter as well. So
no, you're doing some absolutely amazing work in really leading the charge. I'm so thrilled you're doing what you're doing. I'm thrilled that you're doing it so well. And thank you, thank you, thank you.
thank you, Mark. Thank you.